20 years after the fact, and that three-way is still as satisfying as it was the first time. I have seen that three-way multiple times, and every time I see that three-way, I'm able to see things that I wasn't able to focus on because I was absolutely enthralled by the intense action, the satisfying conclusion, and every in and out of that three-way. You will not find three finer people to compete in a three-way in front of a live audience, giving their all, trying to top each other, and pounding and destroying each other in the name of three-way glory. Of course, I mean a three-way in professional wrestling. What the fuck did you think I was talking about, you sick freaks? I'm John Renton with the retro review of TNA Unbreakable 2005. It took place on September 11, 2005 in the Impact Zone with about 800 fans in attendance and witnessing one of, if not the greatest match in TNA history. And yes, I missed the 20-year anniversary of this particular event by just about a couple weeks. I do apologize. I actually did a retro review of this 5 years ago, but I decided to add more detail, more snark, and more fun. And also, it's cool to look back on this and see how many wrestlers are actually still competing and still involved in professional wrestling. And boy, what a strange time it was for TNA. I want to know, were you watching TNA at this point? Let me know in the comments. Did you end up seeing this event years after the fact? Have you watched it multiple times like I have? Did you enjoy the intensity of the three-way? Again, still not quite the most intense three-way that I've ever seen on the internet, but you don't know about the first, and you will never know about the first. But that being said, AJ Styles, Christopher Daniels, Samoa Joe, it was a fabulous fucking match that still is as great this time as it was the first time. Feels like the first time. But again, it was a strange time for TNA because for a brief history, I'm not going to go over everything in granular detail. I'm not going to go into all the minutia and all the ins and outs and everything. But Jeff Jarrett and Jerry Jarrett basically got together, with a financier, and we're going to do, NWA TNA wrestling. And they were going to do the weekly pay-per-view model. That was going to be $9.99 for the weekly pay-per-view because they couldn't get television. Because a lot of television stations remember seeing the doldrums of WCW and the remnants and stuff like that and everything. And even though WWE, they were on TNN, which would become Spike TV, more on them in a bit. USA Network was not going to want anything to do with wrestling if it wasn't WWE, and other stations are moving away from it. And since, TNT, TBS, the AOL Time Warner merger, I think even by this point it was pretty obvious that it wasn't working. There was World Wrestling All-Stars in Australia. They also actually did tour Europe, and that was a really bad. I did all those pay-per-views. It was 5 of those pay-per-views, and God, that took years off my life. Nathan Jones in the fucking ring, good lord. But the whole point is in 2002, and Jeremy Borash was part of this too, and Jeremy Borash actually was the ring announcer for this. They did the weekly pay-per-view model. They opened in Nashville, I believe, if I remember right. It was Nashville or Alabama, one of the two. And they were going to do their own version of the Cruiserweight division, the X division. It's not about weight limits, about no limits. And they would introduce the world of various talents, and they would cycle some veterans through, and they would continue to do the weekly pay-per-view model until they got a TV deal on Fox Sports Net. Now, I used to have Fox Sports Net, and it was a station that had some good reach. Not great reach, but you would see baseball games on there. You would see other sporting events, and it was like Friday afternoon, if I'm right. Thursday or Friday afternoon. I forget exactly what, because that's a deep cut even for me. But I do remember, if I couldn't see it because I was working movie theater in town at the time, I would tape it and I would watch it. Because I'd seen clips of TNA. There were a couple of people I worked with that actually did trade tapes. Yes, that's what we were doing then, because VHS tapes were still going on. And we would sometimes trade tapes back and forth. And I would see some people, and I'm like, okay, AJ Styles, others, and stuff like that. No, Jeff Jarrett's still wrestling. I guess they didn't learn from the last year and a half of WCW. And then finding out later that he owned a part of the company, that was a big deal to get on TV. In the interim, that financier that I mentioned had issues with like a pharmaceutical company or whatever the fuck it was, and Dixie Carter stepped in. And boy, even though she saved the company, let's be perfectly honest, Dixie Carter is one of the worst things to happen to a professional wrestling company because she had no idea what the fuck she was doing. Then she became an on-air character, and it was terrible. This is years before that. But they had the Fox Sports Net deal. They actually continued the weekly pay-per-view model. That was late May, early June that they got that. I think it was early June. And that was early June of 2004. And they continued the weekly pay-per-view model, I think, until September... Early September. I think September 8th or something like that. Or September 8th or 10th. Right around that time. And they were building up to Jeff Jarrett and Jeff Hardy. And then they would go to a monthly pay-per-view model, which was smart because they had weekly TV, so why not eliminate that and just bundle, all those 4 weekly pay-per-view shows into one 3-hour pay-per-view, and then, to be perfectly honest, you end up actually pleasing your audience more, because you use your television to promote your stars and promote stuff, and even though it was only an hour-long program, they were able to do some stuff, and they did Victory Road 04, where Nash and Hall came back. Randy Savage came. Yes, Randy Savage actually wrestled in TNA in the same vein that I technically competed in a rock climbing contest by climbing a wall for 10 minutes. And I love Randy Savage, one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. On my Mount Rushmore, favorite wrestlers of all time, but he did not need to be competing in a wrestling ring at that point. And they were getting a little bit of steam. And then around spring, I think it was around lockdown 2005, it was pretty obvious that they weren't going to be renewed on Fox Sports Net. It either wasn't a moneymaker or the Rays or whatever, they were going to move in another direction. I don't think Fox Sports Net ran wrestling after TNA. I would have to go back and check on that, and I just didn't want to add that much time or much info to my notes. But they lost FSN in late May or very early June. It was one of the two. It was right around the time their year deal was up. This is right before Slammiversary 2005, where Raven would end up winning the NWA Championship. So all of Raven's, 3-month reign was all, it's almost forgotten about. I mean, and Raven, at this point, it was his quest to win the NWA title. He'd been pursuing Jarrett. Heck, he attacked Jarrett in his debut. He got his release in WWE in early 2003 and showed up and did all that and had been competing. And AJ Styles, I think, had won the NWA title just before that at Sacrifice. I think Sacrifice at that point was in May, if I remember right. And actually, I think Sacrifice might have always been in May. Whole point is he beat Jarrett. Tito Ortiz, that crackpot, August 1 warning, no less, was the special guest referee. AJ won, but then AJ lost the title just about a month later, if I recall correctly. Again, some of these dates are a little bit fumbled in my head. But then Raven would win a Slammiversary, and then they would do a couple other pay-per-views. I believe they did No Surrender, and they did 2, I think No Surrender and Hard Justice, or whatever the August one was. I don't remember if the August one was Hard Justice. Whole point is, they were doing a lot of really good stuff. Even though they were showing episodes of Impact on their website, and their pay-per-view buy rates were never that good. I think the most they ever did, at least until maybe recently, was about 50,000, 60,000. That was for Kurt and Joe. It was either Kurt and Joe at Lockdown 08 or it was the first Kurt and Joe match at Genesis 06. But whole thing is this was still when they were on the internet, on their own website, that is. If they had any syndication, it wasn't much. And they were about to get the Spike TV deal. So they either announced it on the next episode or had just found out about it as this was going on. Because they debuted in the very early bit of October 2005. And I remember that. And they quickly got a 2-hour show. So that was a pretty big deal. And I remember the Spike TV deal was actually pretty cool. You had that. You had MXC. It had been going for a couple years at that point. And Spike TV was destination programming. And the Spike deal really did help them. And yeah, this was actually pretty much the precursor, to hyping up this pay-per-view, so here we go. Let's just talk about that. So that's a little bit of history there for those that enjoyed it or those that didn't know. To the best of my ability, I apologize if I screwed up a couple of the pay-per-view names because, again, guys, this is 20 years ago. I have not watched TNA regularly in years, and I do recall enough about the storylines here to give you a bit of an idea. But the main event scene was really fucking messy. So you had Cassidy Riley, who was an enhancement talent guy that Raven kind of took under his wing as his disciple. He took on Jarrell Clark. That I remember being able to hit some pretty impressive flips. He would hit like a 630. I don't know what happened to Jarrell Clark. I don't know what happened to either of these guys, but Jarrell Clark seemed to vanish pretty quickly. Monty Bryan came down and took out both, and he demanded the winner of Rhino versus Raven. That's the NWA title match later tonight. And then Shark Boy beat Mikey Batts. Shark Boy, I think, is still wrestling or at least making appearances. And there was a graphic. This event is dedicated to the unbreakable spirit of the American people because 4 years before, 9/11 happened. And one hardly needs to go on about anything at that point. This is TNA, the new face of professional wrestling. I mean, I did enjoy TNA at this point, especially once it got on Spike. I enjoyed them more than I did weekly WWE because it felt fresh. And then Russo was continuing to, like, get power and, you know, ruin the creative because he didn't know what the fuck he was doing, and Dixie didn't know what the fuck she was doing. Mike Tenay and Don West were a good commentary team, and bless Don West. Rest in peace, Don West. He was not a great commentator as far as traditionalists go, but he had energy, he had enthusiasm, and he knew how to sell shit. And I mean that with respect. He was great with the Don West, you know, brown bag special. I actually remember when they were doing a warehouse cleaning in like 2017. This was either right around or right after the time where I ended up getting really sick with the super flu, hence the, you know, the noise sometimes. It's a combination of that and just basically wrecking my throat from years of talking and years of doing retail and stuff like that and just general shit. But I remember getting those daily deals or the brown bag special or whatever the fuck it was. And I did unboxing videos that were actually pretty popular. I wish I had gotten addresses of people and actually sent them the stuff because there were things I didn't want, but I probably got, I'd say, about $1,200 worth of stuff for like $300. And I had a bunch of the DVDs. I ended up trading them in for other DVDs at a local joint at one point. And I know I'm not talking about the pay-per-view at this time, but my point is that I want to talk a bit about Don West because Don West really was a very nice, from all accounts, people that met him, people that worked with him said he was a very nice man. He was very dedicated. And it's a goddamn shame that he passed away when he did. It's a goddamn shame he passed away in general. But him and Mike Tenay were a pretty good commentary team. And so we start off with 3 Live Crew. That is BG James, a.k.a. Road Dogg, who really was not in good shape at this point. I mean, in general, like he was not. He admitted he'd been going through substance abuse issues and whatever. Conan, who was about to basically end up needing his hip surgery. Conan and Ron the Truth Killings, who looks exactly the same. Looks exactly the same. And this is 20 years and 2 weeks ago. And they took on the Diamonds in the Rough. That was Simon Diamond, who I don't think would wrestle much past this and would become an agent. David Young, who had a decent look. I don't know if he ended up doing much beyond this. And Eli Skipper, who unfortunately would go through personal things. That's all I'm going to say, because I'm not going to repeat it here. But he went through personal stuff and decided to step away from wrestling. He was not a great promo, but he was a hell of a goddamn athlete. And earlier, at, I believe, the Turning Point, it was Turning Point 2004, he created one of the best moments in TNA history. Walking the goddamn cage. I still get goosebumps thinking about it. That's how insane that was. Don West losing it, the crowd losing it. It's a shame it wasn't in a bigger arena, so they could have shot it better. I mean, even though it was shot well, the fact that's an intense moment. This match, however, was just a basic TV match where who throws a shoe? Conan. and the K Factor won it. I believe David Young got pinned. There really wasn't much to this. In fact, a lot of this card really could have just been an episode of Impact. Like, if it had not been for, like, a few matches I'll talk about a little bit later on, including that epic three-way, that intense, throbbing three-way, then I don't think that this card would be remembered all that well. And by the way, this was the only Unbreakable card, or only thing under the Unbreakable name till 2019. So, we see more pre-show footage of Monty Brown and Kip James, a.k.a. Billy Gunn, talking. Remember when he was called the Outlaw briefly, and then WWE put the kibosh on that? And then Jarrett and Jeff Hardy getting involved in the world title scene. More on that later. Austin Aries and Roderick Strong had a match. Roderick Strong is still going, well, strong. And Austin Aries is still not bigger than the turnip. It was cool to see these two guys compete. And it's a shame that Austin Aries decided to just be a malcontented little midget. Otherwise, he probably would have been remembered much more fondly. Also, if he hadn't been named in a lot of scandals. So, that being said, there's some hard chops and some good action here. These guys were working for Ring of Honor, I believe, at this point, and they had a working relationship with Ring of Honor, TNA did, so it's not a bad match. A brainbuster and a 450, 1, 2, 3. Good stuff. You would see better from them in Ring of Honor, but it was nice to see it on TNA pay-per-view. Shane Douglas as a backstage interviewer was just wild. Monty Brown tells Billy Kip James Gunn that he will not apologize to him or Jarrett or anybody. It's a real shame that Monty Brown would end up leaving wrestling, I believe, about 2 years from this day, or maybe just under 2 years, because I believe his sister had a medical episode or something. He ended up taking care of the kids and becoming a personal trainer, which would allow him to do that, and that speaks highly to him. And he was a guy that I don't know if Vince ever would have pushed him. Hell, Jarrett had the chance to put the title on him back in late 04, early 05, and just refused to. But it's fine. It's absolutely fine. So Kip James and Monty Brown took on Apollo. Read up on Apollo, the wrestler, not the Apollo mission. Kind of a little bit shitty, some of the stuff that he was allowed to do and then still compete in wrestling. So, Apollo's partner was Lance Hoyt, a.k.a. Vance Archer, a.k.a. Lance Archer. Yes, that's right. He is still wrestling to this day. And he had some kind of back surgery where he was out for a bit, and he is still back and doing good shit. Sonny Siaki was in their corner, and if I remember right, Sonny Siaki actually had signed with WWE and was gonna... I don't know if Sonny Siaki would have ever been... He kind of looked like a discount version of Dwayne. But if he had been able to, get a chance to really succeed, he might have been somebody. But he ended up, I believe, donating a kidney to one of his relatives, or friend, whichever it was. And then, therefore, he had to retire. But speaks highly of him. Big men doing big men things. Archer still going to this day. Kip James still going to this day. There was a pounce on Apollo, and that won it for the heels. I guess by default they were the heels, and there we are. Team Canada, aka Eric Young, Petey Williams, Bobby Roode, and A1 Alistair Ralph. Or Alistair, was it Alistair Ralph? I don't actually remember if that was him. A1. Yeah, I think it was A1. I remember right. He was a big, beefy guy that didn't really get to do much. But they were talking. Tracy Brooks is there, a.k.a. the future wife of, I believe, Frankie Kazarian, of all people. And that's good. Petey Williams vows to destroy Sabin because they know each other really well. They played Abyss of Steam for Petey. Good technical crew right there. Best crew. Much wow. Petey Williams took on Chris Sabin in a pretty good match. Pretty fabulous work here, in all honesty. They would have better matches. I remember when the Canadian Destroyer was a feared maneuver and not just used as a transition maneuver. So this was supposed to be Shocker. Shocker, I barely know her. But he had travel issues. I forget where the hell TNA said he was. The deep, darkest regions of the Amazonian jungle or something. And TNA also mentioned Hurricane Katrina, which if you take a look at the date that Hurricane Katrina happened and you take a look at this, it's actually wild that from what I heard from people that live in Louisiana, people I trust, they say there are areas that took years to recover. Because why put disaster relief towards people that actually need it? So, there was a point where PD tried to get deep into Saban's eyes. That sounded a lot less dirty in my head. I don't know how, but the Cradle Shocker, 1, 2, 3. I mean, Cradle Shock. Saban is still going, and PD Williams is a backstage agent for WWE. And suddenly a man shows up in slacks. Oh my God, it's Michael Shane. Who, you may be asking? He can be in the first Ultimate X and is related to Shawn Michaels. That's all I'm going to say. That's a little bit of trivia. You guys can figure that out from there. And he says it's going to be Ultimate X at BFG, the first ever Bound for Glory. And then we get the Monster Abyss with Father James Mitchell against Sabu. It's a no DQ match. James Mitchell basically says, well, Sabu's going to meet his demise. He was only 20 years off. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. So, boom, Sabu is in the ring, lights are out, and then Sabu's in the ring. And they didn't use weapons right away, and then they did. And then I remembered how annoying it was, even in 2005, that people were doing this. But the thing is, on a national stage, it wasn't as prolific as it is now, where WWE will do it, AEW will do it. New Japan will just allow everybody to go outside and do whatever as long as they just don't shoot each other, then it's fine. But there was a chair. Sabu broke the legs of a table, but got put through one anyway. He threw a chair at Abyss's head, got a 2 count, did a table leg drop, and the bag attacks. And they did a good job teasing the spot of going through the tacks. I'll say that much. That was at least kind of neat, instead of just, oh, boom. They built it up. Because Sabu tried for, the leg drop he does off the ropes, got caught in the black hole slam into the tacks. 1, 2, 3. And that was a good finish. I'm not a fan of tacks. I said that in my all-out review, but that's because I was about, 10,000, mani tacks. Haha. Really should have called the review that, but I digress. At least it had a decent finish. Alex Shelley then talks about his tag partner, Sean Waltman, not being there. And Sean Waltman was going through personal issues at this point. He has cleaned up his life. I'm not excusing it, but at least he cleaned up his life. It also is wild how many chances Waltman got in TNA. Because he was competing there off and on for a few years. So, Bobby Roode against Jeff Hardy. Jeff Hardy, who had been suspended sometime after, I believe, Lockdown 05. He faced Raven. I don't remember if he competed at the May pay-per-view. I'm genuinely trying to remember. If he did, he was gone soon after that. And he was suspended for at least 4 months. And wasn't at Slammiversary, wasn't at the other 2 pay-per-views I talked about. And then would basically compete against Bobby Roode, where he had been involved in, wanting a shot at the NWA title, because that's who you want to put your title on, a perpetual screw-up like Jeff. And yeah, I know, people make mistakes. Jeff's made constant mistakes, and yes, has owned up to them, but he's also continued to make mistakes, and eventually you just kind of give up on that stuff. Jeff was out of it at this point. Bobby has become a backstage agent in WWE since. I think the last match he had was sometime in 2023. He had neck fusion surgery or something. But this kept just going and going and going. And it was only 10 minutes long, but then it would just keep going and going and stretching out. P.D. Williams shows up with a goddamn stick. The hockey stick, because they're Canadian, and all Canadians carry hockey sticks, evidently. And then Jarrett hit Jeff with the hockey stick, and Bobby Roode got the victory. Which, okay, I'm not against Bobby Roode getting the victory, but come on. That was messy. That was a TV match right there. But yeah, Jeff Hardy, it's funny, he showed up, in June of 04. and would compete pretty much until about lockdown. So about 10 months. And then he was gone for 4 to 5. And then he would back here. He would compete until Genesis 05. I don't even think he was at the December pay-per-view. If he was, it wasn't very memorable. Actually, he might have competed against Monty Brown. But the whole point is that he wasn't around much longer. He was around just a few months. And then wasn't in TNA at all throughout 06. And his deal expired, and then he went back to WWE for a few years and kept getting suspended because, again, he's a perpetual screw-up. And I'm sorry, but people can give him chances all you want, and you can say whatever you want. But others have been, not allowed to compete in wrestling at a high level for less. And yes, he's a rock star. He's charismatic. There's a reason why he's called the Charismatic Enigma. He draws people in. But he also, by this point, needed to basically take stock and just admit that he had a problem. That being said, we get recaps of the tag team title situation. Jimmy Hart is with the Naturals, Chase Stevens and Andy Douglas, which, they were a good team. I wonder what happened to them. And AMW. Not the root beer, but James Storm and Chris Harris. Cowboy and Wildcat. They argue backstage, and basically we get AMW, the team I mentioned, the Naturals, Jimmy Hart out there. Jimmy Hart in TNA is just weird, but he was there for a bit. And it's supposed to be Alex Shelley and Sean Waltman, but it's Alex Shelley on his own. Just wait on this for a second. Against Team Canada, Eric Young and A1. And it's a 4-way elimination tag title match. One partner gets eliminated, the team's eliminated. Okay, fairly simple. Johnny Candido was in the crowd with other members of the Candido family. Not Tammy, because nobody cared about Tammy at that point. Except WWE constantly sending her to rehab. And then her killing an old man, and thankfully she's in jail. Dumb bitch. So that means that Chris should be here, and Tammy should have been the one to go. That being said, Johnny Candido is there, and Alex Shelley and Sean Waltman have won like the Chris Candido Tag Team Invitational Tournament Cup something. I don't remember what the exact phrase was. But Johnny jumps in to help. To help Alex Shelley. In street clothes, because apparently we can just do that. Commentary also was burying the living fuck out of Sean Waltman, which honestly was kind of deserved. Because he was... he was, known for having some issues at that point. Again, he cleaned up his life. That doesn't excuse what he did. And, yeah, Johnny jumps in. He gets in a few shots, but gets hit with a low blow, seemingly, and gets a small package locked on him, and that's how you get out of having Alex Shelley involved in it. Personally, I would have just had Alex Shelley do some stuff and get pinned, but fine. And later, AMW gets eliminated after the hockey stick goes into Chris Harris's back. And AMW were gone. And then Jimmy Hart pushes Eric. He crotches himself on the ropes. And then the natural disaster, that pendulum Tower Doom-like thing. 1, 2, 3. Naturals retain. And the Naturals, if I'm right, would lose the tag titles either at Bound for Glory or on the first episode of Impact on Spike TV. One of the two. Because AMW were about to go heel to team up with Jeff Jarrett. And Gail Kim was actually about to join their ranks as a manager. And boy, Gail Kim got herself in the news recently, didn't she? I'll let you guys decide if you're watching this late into the review what you thought of the Gail Kim stuff. I'm neither here nor there. Kenny also may want to realize that not everybody likes his fluffer. But that being said, it was a fine tag match. I mean, the Naturals gained the victory. It was a good idea. It's a shame that I think fans today don't realize how good they were. And granted, this was 20 years ago. I was 24 when this came out. So, Rhino wants to tear Raven apart and make him bleed. Well, he does that in this Ravens Rules match where a shopping cart full of weapons is brought out and there's no psychology to it. I mean, I'm sorry, there's not. Like, New Jack could get away with it because New Jack really wasn't a wrestler. He was just a fighter, brawler, whatever. Sure, throw stuff outside at each other, and maybe you won't hit the fans. But there's a pizza cutter, and there's a guy, and they're rolling all over the place, and there's a beer keg that's clearly empty, and I'm not saying it doesn't take strength to lift an empty beer keg, but let's not act like that thing weighs 5 million pounds. There's an ankle lock. Yes, we got actual wrestling maneuvers in this, trying to slow and grind down Rhino, who, by the way, had just competed on the WWE's version of ECW, their One Night Stand event, while he was waiting out his 90-day no-compete clause. So they were paying him. I imagine they probably gave him a bonus for that. But that's when the crowd was saying, "You got fired." And that was about 3 months before this, and then he showed up in TNA. I believe he was part of a tag match where he teamed with Jarrett against Raven and somebody. Was it Abyss? I genuinely don't remember. But Cassidy Riley shows up because, again, he was a disciple of Raven, and Raven was bleeding, Rhino was bleeding, and we got a powerbomb through a ladder, an actual ladder, not a wood-painted or silver-painted wood ladder. And then a shopping cart gore attempt that it really looked like, because Rhino, I think, maybe in 2001 could have done. He was a little fleshier at this point, and looked like he probably would have just taken off several layers of his epidermis. But Jeff shows up to stop Jeff, a.k.a. Jeff Hardy, shows up to stop Jeff Jarrett. But basically, the even flow gets hit on Raven, or Raven hits the even flow rather on Jeff Jarrett, and then on Rhino. 1, 2, 3. And the way Rhino had his hand or his arm over goddamn Jarrett, it's like, oh my god, they both got pinned. But no, it was just a one-on-one thing. So yeah, it was messy, but Raven retained. And then I believe would lose the title a week or so later at a Canadian independent show that I believe Scott D'Amore was running, aka the coach of Team Canada. I don't know if he was the coach yet. I think he would show up as the coach. But Raven would lose it there. And Raven would still be in the mix, but he would compete in, like, you know, upper mid-card feuds or mid-card feuds and stuff like that. And Jarrett, that way, could be the anchor as the world champion for seemingly forever. Because he really, I mean, he lost it to Rhino for a couple days of Bound for Glory, won it back. And then would have it for a long time. Well, actually, he would have it till Christian Cage beat him. And then he win it back. And then Sting would beat him a few months later. Whole point is Jeff Jarrett had more title reigns than he deserved. Let's get to Styles versus Daniels versus Joe in a 3-way X Division match. And man, I have gone long on this review, but let's just talk about the fact that this is the best 3-way match that you are ever going to see. The intense competition, the intense stuff. And speaking of intensity, we're going to actually bring on a special guest here, because this special guest has seen this match with me, but see, you didn't want to sit in here with me while I watched it again. And then you are getting goop in your eye. Why are you getting goop in your eye? What's wrong with you? I just took you to the vet like a week ago. He's fine, by the way. This is Sir. So basically what I'm saying is that Joe was undefeated at this point in TNA. Daniels had been the X Division champion since about February or March. Was it March? I think it was. And AJ Styles had been a multi-time NWA TNA champion, even though I think actually they had moved away from the NWA label on the TNA title. And they would actually move away from the NWA in May of 2007. You weren't even alive for that. You'd be really, really old if you were born in 2007. So the whole thing is that this was actually arguably their best match. And I don't mean the best match of these guys' careers. I mean the best match in TNA history. And it's because they paced it well. They would hit the high spots, the spiral tap to break up the pin. We would get Samoa Joe showing off his strength. Daniels just being a tremendous heel at this point as the fallen angel. The crowd was absolutely electric. It's the first time the X Division had main evented a pay-per-view, and I told you that. And then you left the room before the match started. Couldn't believe it. You just couldn't believe it, could you? And basically what ended up happening is through all of this, Joe would look dominant, but it was like something was in the air that we were going to see something, but we weren't going to quite see Samoa Joe win the X Division title yet, because you couldn't quite do that there, because he couldn't. He just was going to have to go through somebody else to get the victory. And basically what ended up happening is Samoa Joe would end up getting knocked out to the outside. Oh, the producer's pissed. I'm going to have to give him more chicken just to satiate him. Oh, I can bring you back on camera. Okay. So basically, Samoa Joe at the end would be knocked out to the side. Knocked outside, that is. And then Daniels would go for the Angel Wings. And Styles would reverse that into a bridge. 1, 2, 3. Daniels was shocked. Styles won. Joe technically did not take the fall. Well, he didn't take the fall. So he's technically undefeated, unpinned. Hasn't been pinned, hasn't been submitted, and that kind of stuff. And that would go until Genesis 2006, where Angle would beat him. And the thing is, realistically, is I can't encapsulate just how great this match is. This match is fucking fabulous, and exactly the type of stuff that would put, TNA on a level to where it was at least a viable alternative to WWE as far as in-ring action. Never money-wise, but TNA at this point was doing a lot of great stuff. I'm not saying everything was great. I'm not saying there wasn't bad creative. But look at WWE in 05. Look at SmackDown brand. There was some bad creative. TNA wasn't perfect, but it was great at this point. So that being said, that was Unbreakable. Pretty long review in all honesty. I didn't expect to go this long, and I didn't expect to take so many avenues. But I hope you enjoyed this deeper dive as far as facts and figures and anything I messed up as far as names of pay-per-views. I apologize. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, Twitter, Letterboxd, Blue Sky handles in the description. I'm John Ritlin, and until we three-way again, always use protection, kids. Happy trails to you.